Hello, everyone. Hope everybody is doing well. Well, I wanted to take this time to respond to some of the comments made about Bernie Sanders in his town hall. And I think he did a pretty good job going to a town hall when he was going to get plenty of opposition, especially from the Fox News channel. Now, before I begin, I'm not taking any sides of either Fox News or Bernie Sanders. I do think that Bernie Sanders has a good point. The inequality is too high, campaign finance structure is terrible, and basically Wall Street has to be held accountable. They need to be regulated, prosecuted, and there needs to be a transaction tax. However, this just shows you some of the inefficiencies that's coming from Fox News. However, Fox News is right that larger government doesn't often mean a more efficient society. In other words, Bernie Sanders wants to increase government services, and not to mention he doesn't address the social justice warrior crap, the massive immigration, the high public employee unions, not to mention the gender destruction and everything else that's happening among the left. And he needs to stand out. The question is, why doesn't he? You see, and so this is the problem. We're at a time in America where you have to cherry pick the benefits of the left and right. However, the left has really gone crazy nowadays. And the problem with Bernie is that he doesn't talk about how, well, these states like California and New York, they're having lots of problems. They tax the wealthy a lot, and a lot of these people are moving out. So let's just see what this guy has to say.
That elderly people do not continue to live in poverty. You got 20% of elderly people trying to get by at $13,000 or $14,000 a year. I think we should raise.
And it's a good point. Social Security has been hijacked for the last few decades, and it certainly has benefited a lot of people.
Use that cap for people making $250,000 or more, so we can make sure that our parents can live out their lives in dignity. I'll tell you what else I think. I think at a time when Wall Street is doing phenomenally well, and we have millions of young people who are deeply in debt for the crime of having gone to college, I believe we should pass a speculation tax on Wall Street.
But I'm asking you.
Okay, now speculation tax is very reasonable. Now, here's the problem with Bernie Sanders and many people on the Democratic leftist side. If you're going to impose a new tax, I would suggest reduce other taxes. I would suggest impose a Wall Street tax, tax remittances, put tariffs, and then how about just eliminating the income tax? Because at the end of the day, and that along with, of course, making sure that large corporations and the wealthy are not getting tax evasions, but just get rid of the income tax. Because we can raise money through other means that's more efficient and beneficial to the economy rather than taxing the average American. Now, here's the problem with this college tuition thing. The idea that everybody's going to college is a corporatist tool. So they kind of limit our education. They put that as a requirement. Bernie Sanders needs to talk about that. He needs to talk about that we need to bring more well-paying jobs that don't require a college degree. Because many of these jobs really don't need a college degree. They just need apprenticeships, training, and something like that. However, the real issue, of course, is that this idea of going to college, spending a lot of time on work and effort that really doesn't benefit you in the real world, that is also the problem. So keep this in mind. And I just think that you also have to keep in mind that the federal government getting involved in the education system is not helping either. You know, considering the Department of Education was started in the late 70s and tuition just bellied up with all this easy credit loans.
About the wealthy and how much higher you would make it. You said you don't agree with 70%. What would your number be?
In the campaign in 2016, we talked about 52%.
All right, so 52%. So would you be willing to pay 52% on the money that you made? You can volunteer, you can send it.
Bernie Sanders does make a point, though, when the marginal tax rate was from 70 to 90%, inequality was low. Although I don't think that that's the main reason why inequality skyrocketed. One, it was because of the busting of the private sector unions, as well as they got hijacked, like the ones we have here in Las Vegas. Not to mention the trade policies. If you do not address immigration, you're fundamentally going to obviously experience a lot of inequality, especially if you're importing people from the third world. Keep this in mind. But Bernie Sanders doesn't really talk about that because it's not necessarily marketing well with the Democratic Party. So he wants to talk about the 52% tax. I just say get rid of the income tax entirely and focus on cutting spending. But to impose a policy that will solve the inequality crisis, what you can do is you can impose a wage ratio among the CEO and the lowest paid employee. That will really solve the problem. Too bad the unions are not really talking about that. Why? Because they've been hijacked, I believe.
Oh, you can volunteer too. We have a...
But you suggested that that's what everybody in your bracket should do.
And Martha, why don't you give? You make more money than I do.
Well,
Why don't you
I
give?
didn't suggest a wealth tax.
And she's not running for president.
All right, but we're going to fight for a wealth tax. And we're going to demand that we end the absurdity where major corporation after major corporation. You know what?
Yeah, but I'm talking
In this tax bill that you are defending, families like the Koch brothers, what you're defending, families like the Koch brothers.
Here's the thing about Bernie Sanders. He talks about the Koch brothers, but does he rarely talk about Bloomberg, Soros, Steyer, a lot of wealthy people? Many of these wealthy people who are not even really backing him. Why doesn't he ever cover those? Think about that.
Get billions and billions of dollars in savings. That is absurd. Trump.
Now, this is where Bernie Sanders is pretty misleading you. The fact is that those so-called tax reform, it actually hit the wealthy quite a bit. Does Bernie Sanders actually tell you why are so many of the wealthy people who are living in New York State and in California are leaving because now they can't deduct their property taxes and their income taxes from the state, from federal? Does he ever tell you about this? Folks, keep this in mind that, I don't know, you might be hearing from a propagandist, but you need to ask him these questions.
Wants to repeal the entire estate tax. Huge tax breaks for billionaires. You got another question?
We have many questions.
We have many questions.
And listen,
Well, I don't think I would support repealing the estate tax, so I'll give him that
we
as
want
well.
to get substance. We want to get details.
let's do it.
And the audience has a ton of questions too.
All right.
Martha?
So our question comes from Kathy Harrington. Kathy, what's your question for Senator Sanders?
Hi, Senator Sanders. Welcome to the Lehigh Valley. So my question is, the definition of socialism is just a society agreeing to work together and combining their resources to make sure everyone is protected and taken care of. How can you challenge the idea that socialism is bad in the minds of the public?
You might have asked them, not me.
First of all, I just wanted to point out that it depends on what you mean socialism, because you can argue that in Scandinavian countries, they have less inequality and they have more services from the government. Not to mention in the 1930s, we increased our services from the government and inequality began to fall well into the 20th century until the 1970s. So it is somehow reasonable to put some government influence regarding CEO pay, regarding Wall Street regulation, and so forth. But I do not want to get to the point where governments are taxing 40 to 50% of my income. There's high government employee pensions and salaries. And not to mention, a lot of services that are funded by the government can be very wasteful, inefficient, and do not serve the public too well. And in fact, people just don't have a lot of savings to buy their own services, which is one of the reasons why I cannot support it. Looking at our public schools, it's very inefficient. Here in Nevada, it's literally on the bottom 5. And it's just so embarrassing, ladies and gentlemen. So I can tell you, believe it or not, that things are not looking pretty good when it comes to increasing government and services. It isn't always the case, but I do not want to see what's happening more resembling in California and New York, especially when they're giving more government services to third world immigrants. That is certainly not working. Bernie needs to address that.
But
Is this going to be a constant thing?
no, it will not.
All right.
All right. You ask me fair questions, I will give you fair answers.
Thank you, sir.
That's the deal.
And you know, not everybody thought that I should come on this show.
And we appreciate it.
All right. Your net.
And it's good that they're coming together, because really my problem with politicians is not really their party, but it's how they behave and how they respect views from everybody in the spectrum. So kudos to him.
Does not necessarily have a great deal of respect in my world, but I thought it was important for me to be here and have a serious discussion about serious issues. Sally asked a good question. Thanks for that question, Sally. And let's talk about it. I think it's an important issue, but it will come up. What is democratic socialism? Fair question. Okay. So let's talk about it. Democratic socialism to me is creating a government and an economy and a society which works for all rather than just the top 1%. It means ending the absurd inequalities that exist today. And I want to lay this out.
Okay, well, you don't really need a very large socialistic government to do that. Now, you can argue, yes, capitalist societies like we had in the Gilded Age or in places like Hong Kong, there's a lot of inequality. But I think basic regulation can really solve the problem. Now, I don't know if that's really socialistic. That's just really a market economy that is mostly capitalistic. Because I believe still low taxes, especially for the bottom 90%, and limited government, and lots of personal freedom, and lots of economic freedom, as long as the wealthy and powerful don't get out of hand, that is something what we really need. But anyway, the point is, all these isms, socialism, capitalism, communism, they're all flawed either way. Because in a capitalist system, the consumer has to be smart. If the consumer is dumb, then it doesn't lead to the safest and most efficient products. And of course, the business owner wants to pay their workers quite often the lowest as they can, so they rig the system. So there's a lot of inefficiencies. So I don't really know what to tell you folks. I think that given our technological advantages, we could see a sign that a resource-based economy is coming pretty soon, the Zeitgeist movement. I suggest you look into that. I don't know if that's going to be a really good system. I think there's going to be inefficiencies with that, but certainly that idea sounds more reasonable and more functional. I could be wrong, but anyway, that's my take. Let me know what you guys think. Please share this video and subscribe.